All right, mates, welcome back to the channel. JL Scott Fishing. We're going to talk a little hard bait action today, swim bait and glide baits, because it's been kind of crazy. So you may have seen on my Facebook page, I actually landed my first 2 smallies on the river with swim baits and glide baits. Okay, crazy. You know, everyone, all the naysayers pretty much will tell you, that, it's not the right bait to fish for smallies. But, again, fish different, okay? And here where we fish, in the DMV, that's the District of Maryland and Virginia, that is so important because unless you're a one-dimensional angler, and I don't mean to disrespect anybody who only fishes for bass, but if you fish for trout and you fish for snakeheads, and then you have the bay and you're doing some saltwater fishing, you have so many things to think about to differentiate, right, when you're doing different things. And so many times people stay in the box. They keep things in the box. Oh, well, we don't do that when we fish for bass, or we don't do that. And I've learned so much in the last, decade from people who have only fished trout, okay? And in terms of baits, right? In terms of downsizing my bait sometimes in the summertime, using flies to catch smallmouth. It's every bit as killer as a hair jig, okay, on the river systems in the region. But a lot of people don't, that's a trout thing, that's a bass thing, that's a snakehead thing. And one of the aspects of swim bait and glide baits that I want to cover today, because I really think fishing for snakeheads and throwing frogs and using different line, and then fishing for trout and using different line, it really opens your eyes up a little bit of how you can take what you're learning from other species and apply it on the river to fishing for smallmouth and largemouth. And what I want to talk about today with these, and obviously I've got a 6-inch trace, a 6-ounce swim bait. They also come in a 5-ounce, a size 5 swim bait from 6 cents. Now the 5s don't have nearly the depth of the color variation and patterns that may match your forage. This right here is a wild shad pattern in the 6. Okay, and fundamentally, what you have with the swim baits and the glide baits is really, people always, what's the difference between the two? And really, it fundamentally is, swim baits have multi-joints, and a glide bait has basically one pivot. Okay, one pivot joint. Okay, glide bait, swim bait, 6 inches, a little over 7 inches. Okay, one of the things you can do, I will say this with 6 cents, that offers you the capability of doing this, and it's actually a neat little trick. You could change out the tail. You could buy the tail separate. So you can get your swim bait, okay, in whatever pattern you want. I would probably say gizzard shad's probably the most popular, I would think. But this is a wild shad pattern, okay. I have bluegill, wild shad, trying to remember the electric shad. I don't have blue herring yet for Lake Anna and places like that. I'm going to try and find one, but every time I look, there's no inventory where I get it. So not surprising with all the tournaments that are being held down on Lake Hartwell and Murray and all these different places, with the results coming back from those tournaments, those baits get bought up pretty quick. But what's interesting is you can change out the color of that tail. Okay? There's a chartreuse, I think it's a chartreuse fire, chartreuse. I just like it, that chartreuse back, okay? So you could just change it out. And that's a neat little thing you could do to change it up. I wish there was more of a red. I wish 6 cents had more of a red tip, or a red, like a bleeding shad tail. And I don't know, I have not explored whether or not, I may pick up a couple of these tails and paint them and see how that works on this particular product they have here in terms of the tail, the plastic and stuff, and see how that works. Hopefully they'll come out with a red, like a bleeding shad red tail. That would be kind of awesome. The other thing, what I will say about these with the 6s is, I haven't done it on this one yet, is I recommend changing out the hooks. Okay, look at the difference between this glide bait, which is bigger, and the hooks difference. I just know when you get out there and throwing swim baits more now this year than ever for me, because it's a new learning curve for me. Do not profess to be an expert swim bait or glide bait angler. Is I don't like this big of a hook. And so, you know, to each is his own. For me, I'm the same way I don't like some of the stock hooks that come on my jerk baits. And what I've learned is, and talking with some musky anglers that I really, really respect, with the motion of the musky baits, and then the S motion of the glide bait, and different ways to present that. I'm really taking a lot of the knowledge I've gained from jerkbait fishing over the years and now applying it to my line selection for the hard bait, the glide bait, and the swim bait. And you know as well as I do, mates, if you ask 10 guys about line options, you're going to get 10 different answers. Doesn't mean that any of the answers are wrong. It doesn't. But for me, I am opting for, again, extension of lines that I feel comfortable with, right? And so where I would not normally throw a copolymer in any other presentation, like for me personally, I find in this presentation, it has worked the best. Okay, and it was recommended to me, P-Line CXX. I would go 15 pound. If you want to go 17, 20, but I would go 15 pound. Remember on those P-lines, a lot of those lines of P-lines, why I like them so much, it's all about the diameter, okay? The process of making that line, okay? It's all about the diameter. And why is that diameter such a big deal for a swim bait or a glide bait, right? Why? Same for jerk baits, right? A lot of people get just beat up for throwing monofilament for jerk baits because there's a big fluorocarbon fan, and a lot of people are really, really just 100% fluorocarbon guys, and there's nothing wrong with that. You can certainly throw fluorocarbon on the swim baits and glide baits. But what's the number one concern that a lot of people have about throwing a $35, I guess it's like 35, I think, $35 swim bait, okay? Losing it, right? That's why more people won't buy these baits. How many $100 swim baits or glide baits do you own? Think about it. But then think about how many $10 crankbaits do you go through in a year if you live in Virginia? Okay, fishing Briary Creek, right? How many crankbaits at $9, $9.99 a crankbait do you go through in a season? So think about it like that. You have to think about sometimes, again, think different about a lot of this stuff. So if that's your concern, that's all about the knot, right? The knot tying is a big thing. So which line is better for really knot tying? Copolymer, right? Okay, so that checks a box there. The second thing is if you're throwing braid, and sometimes anything like that kind of line, understand that in these glide baits, the force that you're talking about when you throw that, right, and the weight in the front on this head, okay, and the balance will transfer is different, okay, but when that bait hits the water, okay, and then you get that, less terms of stretch, you put a lot of torque on the end of that line, okay, with that glide bait, any big baits, okay, to some people, this is a small glide bait, okay, because they go all the way up, 9s and 12s and all the way up. So braid's not really, and again, I'm not dismissing people who use braid, but to me, a lot of people will throw braid with a leader, right, because of that, okay. Well, it makes perfect sense for some people. Some people are definitely comfortable doing that. You want a line like a P-line. I know a lot of people also recommend probably Sunline, Sniper, something like that, because of its stretch. That's really what you want, okay, is the stretch, okay? Abrasion resistant, yes, But if you're looking at this and that making those movements in the water, okay, let's talk about the water for a second. All right. Cold water, wintertime. What happens to the water other than it gets cold? Okay. It's what? Dense or less dense? Okay. How do your baits and topwaters and other baits, your jerk baits, your topwater baits, your plopper, your chatterbait, how do they work in cold water really? If you're paying attention. Okay. There's a lot more drag in cold water, right? Because cold water is more dense. You get to the summertime, late spring and into summer, the water moves up to 75, 80 degrees, right? It's less. It's less dense. It's freer. These are going to move freer in the water column, okay, than they would, say, in January or February. You want to think about your line, because if that's going to happen, then you want your line to have stretch, right? Because it's moving. Think of muskie fishermen, right? That line is moving. This bait is turning constantly. It's not a throw your whopper plopper out and burn it straight back to you, or like a chatterbait that people do, right? It's a completely different. So you want that stretch. You also want abrasion resistance, because that stretch, okay, is going to work that line up here and potentially cause what? If you're not using the right line, okay? If you don't wet your fluorocarbon, why are we wetting why do you always see people wet their fluorocarbon right when they tie their knot? Okay? It's because fluorocarbon has a tendency to get hot, right? And if something gets hot, it's more apt to snap, right? And so giving it a little bit water, that's why people do that in reality. People have a whole bunch of other explanations, but that's really what they're really doing, okay? In terms of keeping the heat out of that knot, okay? So I'm using a P-Line CXX, okay? And it comes in any number of colors from moss green to smoke blue, clear, and so you got some options there. But that's just what I'm finding in that 15. You could go, now understand this, you could go to a lower, like a 12-pound P-Line because of that diameter. Okay, you could go lower, but I think like 15 to 20, 15, 17 is probably at least it's been great. Casting, it's been great. As a copolymer for me, for that, finding that right type of line for these glide baits, okay, that are very, very different. The swim baits and glide baits, a lot of it depends on how much weight you have in the head, depending on whether it's a glide bait or swim bait. How much weight transfer system balancing do you have? Okay, how big look at this. Look at the difference between these two in the width of the bellies, right? Okay, all that comes into play with drag, right? But fundamentally, as the water warms up, your drag gets less. Okay, the thicker the line you're using, okay. Remember, our lines are fundamentally began with braid, okay, mono, fluoro, and copolymer, right? Those are your four basic kinds of line, right? Okay, the thicker that line is in diameter, the greater the drag is going to be on your bait, and more pressure is put on your reel, okay, and your line, all right? And so the thinner the line diameter that you have, that you can get away with, okay, creates throughput in the water. What do I mean by throughput? What I mean by, once you get that glide bait or swim bait to where you want it to be, throughput is everything from that point back to the boat, okay? Through the water. How does it move through the water, right? And, in terms of, is it twisting your line up because you're using the wrong line, okay? Everyone talks about how line memory, all that stuff, right? But you want, again, stretch. That's really the key thing that you want, and line diameter are the key things. For me, I think P-Line gives you more bang for your buck based on strength, abrasion resistance, stretch, and the diameter. You can always get a larger diameter line. They're a dime a dozen, okay, on the market. Okay, copolymer actually also is cheaper than fluorocarbon. So throw that into the mix. if you're starting out, because there's a bunch of uses I'm thinking in my head now that I may start to try some things with this copolymer, with this CXX, because I'm used to using Halo or tactical fluorocarbon from P-Line for a lot of other presentations. Okay, so but now I'm kind of interested based on the performance. But I got my first 2 smallies. Okay, and so people have asked me already, like, okay, like talk to me about the smallies. What were you seeing? Well, what I'm seeing is these creeks on the river and on my river, as well as the Occoquan. Okay, the Occoquan just finished its Hickory and American shad run. Okay. All the way up to the point where it couldn't go any further, and right, and they either die or they do their thing and they die or they go back, right? So that's what the bass are seeing, right? So the Occoquan is largemouth, okay? The upper Potomac is smallmouth, but the same thing happens with like creek chub and like species like that, okay, that run up the creeks, right? Just run up all your small little cuts and your creeks that litter the upper Potomac. Some of them just are creeks, some of them are tribs, okay? I find it more in the creeks, which I would call a creek, not a tributary. The Monocacy is a trib, okay? It is a river. It's not a creek, okay? But there are tons of creeks like Goose Creek on the Virginia side, okay? Antietam Creek on the Maryland side. Tons of creeks where these chubs, we call them creek chubs, they'll get anywhere from 4 inches to 7 inches. And at certain times, the smallies will crush them. And then at other times of the year, you're not going to catch any smallies, I think, on these larger size glide baits and swim baits. And the biggest reason is, in the pre-spawn, they're feeding up. So they become lunch, right? They become, boom, they're targeting those fish. And the thing about it, mates, is both of these smallmouths were 17.5 to 18 inches. So that tells me probably your 12, 13s or so in the river that are abundant aren't going to touch this. You're going to get a bigger bite when that bite is on, especially if you see those chubs. If you start getting into them, and what I mean by that is getting into chubs. If you start getting into those creek chubs back up in that creek towards the aqueducts, towards the bridges, right? You know, okay, they're there. So then change up, okay, because if they're there, the smallies are not going to be that far away, okay? Again, in the pre-spawn going into spawn, and then again later on in the year when they want to fatten up for the wintertime. That's what I'm seeing right now, and that's what I anticipate. I don't necessarily anticipate it being a huge bite for the swim bait or the glide bait, okay, in the summertime. Necessarily on the river. We'll see what happens. But hitting up smallies on the Potomac and then hitting up a 5-pounder on Occoquan. Okay? And I'm going to take this baby on down to Hunting Run. And I'm going to take this baby on down to Mooney. And I'm going to take this baby on down to Sandy. Okay? In Virginia. And I'm going to see what happens. Because I want to test some of this out. Test the line out. Test the hooks, change the hooks out, do some different things, change the tail patterns. Okay, I'm going to get some in, probably order from Tackle Warehouse today. Some more different colors. May try and grab one I can paint to change it up. Again, there is a plethora of forage patterns in the 6 ounce from 6 cents, okay? The 5 ounce does not nearly have as much diversity. So you could grab some of those and have them painted with your custom bait maker. And if you need someone to give you a line, if you need a line on that, hit me up. You know, I certainly could set you up with that. Someone did give you a nice repaint, match your forage that you got in your river system. But that's really it. That's what I found so far. You certainly could change that. Look, against the line selections. I'm talking about P-Line, Sunline, even Trilene, Big Game, cheap, inexpensive. You know, but I will tell you this: P-Line until April 30th. P-Line has BOGO happening, man. Buy one, get one until April 30th. Let me tell you this much, too. P-Line is also the preferred line of Brian Thrift. Okay, you guys know I throw Fitzgerald rods now. Okay, I'm just telling you, he just won Red Crest. P-Line. Okay, all different sizes. I'm sure you can find some information on his page or in his videos about the different line weights and the different P line that he's using for his different presentations. Because if you watch that mate fish, he's got it all on the deck. Okay, and it's probably not all the same line, right? And so I'm sure he provides that information. I'll reach out, try and see if I know they've got another event. And some of the other P-line guys to kind of get some other feedback. But start with that CXX. It's available at Tackle Warehouse, probably available at Fishing Online and Fish USA as well. Go with that 15-pound. Start that. Go with your preferred color, moss green or smoke blue. Those things, whatever, The line color thing is another thing. It's kind of just a fascination thing with a lot of people. But whatever your poison is. Go with that, and I'll see you again. They also have high vis. High vis was the other one I couldn't remember. So moss, clear, smoke blue, and high vis. Okay, think of your line options for the CXX copolymer. All right. Any questions? Hit me in the comments. JL Scott Fishing and Eats. Check out the video. I'll get those videos up, as well as the next video set. Actually throwing the swim bait the next trip out. We're going to a reservoir. We are going to throw the shad and rainbow trout pattern, as well as the bluegill pattern swim baits. So hopefully we'll put this to the test and we'll get some nice shots, get some money shots for everybody to check out. All right, mates.